Morning, everybody. Happy holiday hump day, that day in the summer holidays where you don't know about halfway between when it started and halfway when it ends, and you have no idea where you are, somewhere in the middle. Welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's assistant editor, Jason Beattie. Morning, Jason.
Morning, Susie. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to get on with some work instead, won't you? So, what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on the dramatic arrest yesterday of 3 Bulgarian nationals accused of spying for Russian secret services for more than a decade. Lots more detail on who and what and why all that was going on inside the paper. But first off, I want to take us to page 2, where it seems a completely cash-strapped country that cannot afford to pay its doctors or its nurses or its social workers or its teachers to actually save and improve lives can afford to give an extra £10 billion to people who've stopped working altogether. Jason, can you explain the maths on this to us?
It's the triple lock, Susie.
Triple lock, which should be like, it sounds like a triple choc, like the wonderful new chocolate bar that we would all enjoy.
Yeah, or a challenge for any safe breaker. It is that a pledge by the Conservative government that pensions will rise by average earnings, or inflation, or 2.5%, or whichever is higher. And
they're all through the roof.
Yeah, and well, this is based on figures from May to June each year, and if you notice this week that the earnings went up slightly.
I didn't notice because it didn't happen to me.
Just to be clear on this, when it says earnings went up, earnings have been massively low since 2008 anyway. So they've gone up a tiny bit, and they're mainly gone up as a result of rich people, bosses, executives, etc., paying massive bonuses. Not because of wage inflation for people who actually need it. But that's by the by, because they have gone up, the government is going to have to increase the state pension, which is good news if you're a poor pensioner. And there are at least 1 million pensioners in poverty, so we understand why they, will welcome this. It's not so good news if you're a Conservative politician.
Why not? What's wrong with it? I mean, this is David Cameron's great idea. Surely they're all over this. They love
because in the famous words of Liam Burn, there's no money left, and what money they wanted to use for tax cuts as a bribe ahead of a general election. If they're going to have to spend an extra 10 billion at least on the pension rise, that doesn't leave much room for tax cuts. Hence the dilemma.
Yes, it is rather a dilemma. What do you think, everybody? Do you think it's perfectly fair and reasonable to be giving effectively a pay rise, I suppose, to pensioners, many of whom, as we just heard, are quite poor? They don't have a huge amount of money. It's only 200 odd quid a week. I can remember my grandmother and grandfather on state pensions, having to eke out 50p's here, there and everywhere. Or do you think this is just a bit ridiculous when so many people are struggling that pensioners have to just bite it the same way that everyone else is? It does seem to be, Jason, that it's a political decision rather than a mathematical one. They've tied themselves into this triple lock business. But when we've got no money for you young'uns or the young'uns' parents, but we're going to have to print a few £1 billion more for the older ones because they're more likely to vote, isn't it? In fact, that's why they had the pension triple lock. It was to buy the grey vote. I mean, that is the basics of it. And that's why they can't now turn around and say, especially when there's a cost of living, the price of everything's gone up, they can't turn around to pensioners, many of whom vote Conservative, and say, no, you're going to have to do less. So
at the last election, the over 65s voted overwhelmingly. I mean, overwhelmingly, we're talking 1 in 3 for the Conservatives. Oh, sorry, 65% to 70% for Conservatives. And the older you got, the higher it got. Yeah. So the over 80s, they voted even more large numbers for Conservatives. And there's the bigger picture here as well is you've got newspapers, particularly right-wing newspapers like the Express and the Mail and the Telegraph, which have old readership. And the Mirror's readership is, the average age is about 58, 59 in print. Yeah, it's even older for the yeah.
They're not going to die as soon as the rest of them, though. So, right.
So these papers, in tune with their readers, you could say, they are really, really vociferous and determined in campaigning to make sure that pensioners get, the rise each year, and they get very cross if there's any hint, as Sunak did last year, that the triple lock could be abandoned. So you've got that problem of the wanting to keep the voters, the older voters, on your side. Plus, you've got the papers, in which your main cheerleaders insisting you have this, against and I phrase this very carefully because I'm very sympathetic, but a lot of pensioners do really struggle. But overall wealth is skewed towards those who are older and away from those who are younger.
Yeah.
And this is the point I think you were making right at the beginning. If you have 10 billion to spare, why can't that go on, let's say, alleviating poverty or increasing wages for those who most need it, or paying our nurses properly, or paying our teaching assistants properly, or paying our cleaners and council staff properly? And the reason it doesn't is because we have now created this real great inequality in wealth in this country. So by and large, if you're older, you're more likely to own your own home. That home has appreciated in value massively. So you've got wealth in your housing stock. You are doing very well. Not, I mean, I say very well. You've got a increasingly generous pension system. And yet, if you're a young person, you can't get on the housing ladder. Your rents are astronomical. You can't actually afford to do anything. And because the money has been so unfairly distributed. That is at the key of this.
Yeah, and it's a bit more unfair distribution. I mean, Mike was just saying there, the Tories don't have an option really to cancel the triple lock, because pensioners are the only demographic that they have left that might actually vote for them. There aren't any, they can't argue about Brexit anymore and get people to vote for them on that basis. If you are a dyed-in-the-wool racist, you're not going to vote for this lot because they're screwing up the immigration issue. And if you're remotely sort of centrist or middle ground or a bit younger, they're not doing anything for you either. And so the pensioners are the most reliable part of their electorate, and they're going to have to keep pushing it. But how sustainable is this, though? What do you think, everybody? Do you think that there is some way that a government could, a Labour government even, could ever scrap the triple lock and ever find a way to sell that to the electorate? Because I'd love to hear what it is. I think we're a bit stuck with it, to be honest. But how sustainable is it, Jason? There comes a point, surely, where they're going to have to say, these arbitrary rules about raising pensions by this much every year. You're going to have times where, like at the moment, temporarily, you have a massive burst of inflation, and it's going to create an anomaly. And it's not, you could raise pensions by that much now, but in 4 years' time, the rates have come back down, and you don't need the same anymore.
And we have an aging population.
Exactly.
So there's going to be even more pensioners, and what governments are doing is, and this is not unique to Britain, by the way. This is one of the reasons they had riots on the streets of France. So what they do two things. Is they keep raising the state pension age to try and push back the time they have to pay out this money for an aging population, and they keep increasing the burdens on the younger generation who are in work to pay for the pensions for the older people.
Yeah.
Basically, don't be young in this country is my advice.
No, but then again, perhaps if they were going to use the 10 billion, for something that pensioners are going to benefit, if they invested it in geriatric care, if they invested it in social care, you can say, all right, we're not going to pay the triple lock this year, but that 10 billion we are going to spend on things that you are going to personally benefit from. We're going to have better social care service in this country, which actually younger people would benefit from too, because, they have to do a lot of the caring. Some of them also need social care. Then it would just, there's a way around it, I'm sure, but maybe a different government, not this one. I suppose the big one, Jason, you may have just slightly answered it, but where would the money be coming from to find this 10 billion? Because they haven't been able to find $1 billion here or there for nurses. Where are they going to find 10?
They just increase government borrowing if necessary.
Well, exactly. They can find it if they want to.
Yeah, there's always money if they want to find it. It's this question of how much they want to increase government borrowing. As I say, but the political difficulty for them is they've also got a lot of Tory backbenchers clamouring very loudly to go into the next general election promising tax cuts. That's the kind of Tory bread and butter. That's what they believe in. And yet Jeremy Hunt has just now got to kind of find 10 billion extra to pay for the pension increase and satisfy these Tory MPs. It's going to be very difficult.
Not going to be done, is it? Julie says the state pension is not enough to live on. It's about £200 a week. Julie, you're quite right. And of course, part of the reason for the triple up being imposed was because historically it was absolutely appalling, the state pension levels. And it wasn't enough at all. If you've paid off your mortgage and you're sat in a house that isn't costing you too much, then it's probably bearable. But if you're living in rented, then you're a bit stuffed, aren't you? Well, thank you for that, everybody. Danny says, blimey, these 40 new hospitals aren't very big. We need to move on to the main story of the day now, which is about hospitals. Thank you for that, Danny. Nice segue. You'll be glad to know that Rishi Sunak has returned from holiday in Disneyland and is keen to get back to work, destroying the country for us. His chosen method yesterday was to visit a hospital in Milton Keynes, not a new one, a previous one that's already been there, and announce 900 new NHS beds. Jason, why isn't this a good news story?
Because you can see the second line of it. Because since they came to power, they've cut 12,000 bed places.
So it's not even a 12th or a 10th of what they're going to destroy.
What they're trying to do, this is kind of a great Tory con trick. It was Boris Johnson, not necessarily to his credit, but politically astutely did it first. So he came into power in 2019 and just decided to reset the clock. And there wasn't the Tories hadn't been in power for the previous 9 years, and this is a fresh room. And we're going to promise 40 new hospitals, as our friend just pointed out. We're going to recruit 20,000 new police officers, and all the wonderful things which this country needs. We're going to provide, forgetting that all the problems they were trying to resolve that they'd caused in the first place. So this is Tory mathematics for you. You cut 21,000 police officers as they did under Cameron and Osborne, and then try and claim credit for recruiting another 20,000. They cut 12,000 hospital beds and then try and claim credit for creating 9,900 new ones. I mean, it's a bit like a kind of a bank robber taking kind of 900 quid out of your account and then expect you to be grateful because he's returned 200 quid. That's how they work.
Well, not even returned it. Dropped 50p on his way out the door. And you're allowed to pick it up off the ground. Loki's Children says the only thing Sunak, the unelected dictator, has done is rob the nation to enrich himself. Okay, thanks, Loki. We're not going to comment on that. But this does seem to be, they've got these 900 beds, okay, which is replacing the 12,000 that have been lost. That is 7.5%. Of the total. But there's a rub here, which is they're not going to get them until after winter, when you'd actually need the damn things. And there's no staff to run them because there's 100,000 vacancies in the NHS. So they're just a bed you can look at and go, oh, look, it's a bed. And you can go and die in it as opposed to on the floor. And to really annoy the hospital staff in Milton Keynes, who had to stop what they were doing to let Rishi Sunak fanny about with his press team, they're only getting 1 or 2 of the beds in that actual hospital because the 900 are spread over the entire country. Chris says, just imagine how bad it's going to get under a Labour government. You'll be begging for the Tories back.
Chris, just for the record, when Labour left power in 2010, satisfaction with the NHS was at an all-high record. Just point that out.
I don't know. Maybe he's referring to something else going bad under a Labour government, but I'm pretty certain that the NHS won't be as bad as it is now. But beyond that,
record investment in the NHS. Waiting lists were cut to an almost all-time low. Yeah, there was you could see your GP within 48 hours. Now you're lucky to see one in a month. But obviously, Chris, if you decide that that's going to be a disaster, that's your decision, not mine.
Before it's happened. Now, this is not a Labour Party outpost. We will criticise a Labour government just as much as we will a Tory one on this programme. But they're not currently in government. And the party that is currently in government, the Tories, I've just offered you 7.5% of the beds they've spent a decade destroying with no one to run them. That is just how it is.
I mean, politically, I'm not quite sure what Sunak is doing here. I mean, last week was Small Boats Week, and for the government, and they had a wave of announcements on small boats, which every single thing seemed to go wrong. Where there's a border force cutter kind of having to be withdrawn from service, a £400,000 drone from monitoring crossings of a channel crashing into the sea, the having to take the asylum seekers off the Bibi Stockholm accommodation barge in Portland Harbour. I mean, it was just disaster, and the number of crossings reached a record level. This week, they're doing NHS week for the Conservatives, supposedly to take the fight to Labour on this one, and all they're doing is drawing attention to the dire situation they left the NHS in as a result of years of underfunding.
Exactly.
It's an odd kind of political kind of gambit to find the weakest points in your own kind of armory and then try and go on the attack. It's slightly baffling me, to be honest with you.
Well, maybe that's just indicative of the state of mind within government at the moment. This is how they think that they can win stuff. They're absolutely deluded. Now, Mike says NHS England announced 5,000 new hospital beds in January. It's unclear whether the 900 announced this week are part of that 5,000, but I'm pretty sure those haven't even been delivered yet. I don't think they can deliver any new beds because it's not just a case of buying a bed. You have to have maybe 6 nurses to run a bed. And 1/5 of a doctor or something. You have to have staff to cover those beds, and you can't just supply it. We've all been in hospitals. They come attached to computers these days. You need staff. You need electricians. You need technical support. You need all kinds of things with a bed. Never mind a ward to actually put the bed in where the roof isn't fallen in. So, just promising beds isn't necessarily actually going to produce the delivery of the beds. Now, as Jason was saying, and let us know what you think, everybody. How is Health Week going? Last week was Small Boats Week. This week is supposed to be Health Week. It's a series of carefully planned and choreographed announcements to make the Tories look really good on tackling these health problems. They started the week by saying that people with cancer would have to wait longer for treatment, which is the same as saying they're going to die. They've announced something no one's ever going to really notice in terms of these very few beds. I mean, what's next, Jason? Ambulances going green by making paramedics push them to 999 calls? I wouldn't put it past them, would you?
Yeah. The new penny farthing paramedic service. I think that's going to be a good idea.
Well, it would be very eco-friendly. Maybe they could find some way that actually pedal power would help supply some of the generators or something like that. Now, the patients at Milton Keynes weren't too impressed with Rishi Sunak's stunt. One woman outside A&E said nursing as a vocation was being used as a weapon to deny them fair pay rises, while one RAF veteran said Sunak's offer was just a bribe from someone who didn't understand ordinary people. The Tories say that, as you said, Jason, they're taking the fight to Labour. But I mean, arguably, whether it's pensions or NHS or where they're finding the money for all this stuff, they're really only fighting with themselves, aren't they? It's just constant Tory rows.
I mean, I think the big problem they've got is that they were kind of relying on the kind of country having a general amnesia about kind of their record in office. And I think people have kind of wised up to this now, that they are being held to account for what they have and haven't achieved in the last 13 years. And the question which, Labour will ask repeatedly at the general election is, do you feel better off than you did 14 years ago? And has your country improved in the last 14 years? And the answer resoundingly is no, things aren't working. Things have got worse.
Yeah.
Economically, I don't feel as secure. In fact, in many cases, people feel a lot worse off. And I don't think they can escape their past anymore. I mean, this is Rishi trying to do this kind of, as I said, this Boris Johnson playbook idea of year zero. And I don't think it washes. I think voters are wised up.
Well, as Loki's Children says, what has Sunak done since he's been in power? Since he was in power as Chancellor, I think the main thing he did was he cut road repair funding by about half, while in other developed nations it just about doubled. So all the potholes you've got, which he vows he's going to fill in, are a result of him being Chancellor of the Exchequer. Anything else, Jason? What can you remember he's done since he's been in power? He's not been
He's made some very nice videos.
He's made some very nice videos. He announced a medal for the nuclear test veterans. Let's be fair. He did do that, and he was did appear a little bit moved when he saw their reaction to it. But in terms of actually sort of running the country, there's a bit, if people are asking this kind of question, what's he done? What's the point? What's the benefit? And the best they can do is highlight their incompetence on immigration, their inability to organise a ferry, for goodness sake, and actually provide any staff to actually run a bed that is invisible anyway. People are going to make regardless of a triple lock or otherwise, they're going to make a decision against them. That's why the polls are showing the Tories are doing so badly. Is there any sign that all this new aggression and taking the fight to Labour is actually going to pick up at all? Going to pick them up in the polls?
The only thing which may help them, and that's what they're clinging on to desperately, is there's going to be some improvement in the economy in the next 12 months, which is why they're holding on for as long as possible to hold the general election. The inflation is figures, but they're looking marginally better this morning. Wages have increased a little bit. If that starts to filter through to people feeling a little bit better off, that could help them. But against that is, of course, the rise in mortgage and rental costs. So it is all still to come down the track.
Yeah, and as Leslie says, why do they seem to think we're all suffering from amnesia? That even if we started feeling a bit better off next week or next month or next year, no one is going to forget Barnum and Castle. No one is going to forget the parties. No one's going to forget the economic incompetence, austerity, and all these other problems which we can see have just caused us where we are. And
nobody should be allowed to forget Liz Truss.
No. We do, of course. We're trying to blank it out, but
Tories are trying to blank it out. But...
Yeah, well, she's got her 14 honours, isn't she? Which is going to be decided fairly soon.
Yeah, one for every kind of 3.6 days she was in office. That's just extraordinary.
Do we know who any of them are yet?
Not sure.
No, people who don't want their names on things, probably. Ennobled by Liz Truss isn't something that you really want on your gravestone, is it? Anyway, thank you for that, Jason. Thank you for taking us through all that, and thank you everyone for taking part. Now, we do have some good news in the world. We found it for you, and here it is. Now, seeing as pensions can't keep on rising, and Rishi Sunak seems to be a secret Russian agent working to bring Britain down, it's just as well there are people like Pauline Martin, pictured here, who is still working and enjoying it, aged 99. Now, Jason, I know that you think it's a bit dystopian that a senior citizen feels the need to still be doing this, but Pauline works at the family seed company in Cornwall, where she's known as the boss. She goes out on deliveries with her grandson and seems very happy to be engaged and interested in what's going on, and still very much part of the community as well. Jason, is this proof that if you're trying to grow and improve things as opposed to destroy them, there's always more fun things to do?
I think it's great. I mean, people want, I don't want to make it compulsory, but if people, there may be some politicians out there going, "Oh, here's a good idea."
Yes, let's make everyone work until they're 99.
Yeah, it's the only way we're going to pay for the pensions. No, I think it's fantastic. And she seems happy, and that's her great grandson who looks very happy as well.
Yeah,
going, oh my God, I'm going to be here for 99 years at least.
I'm never going to get out. The important thing Pauline says is that staying interested like that, keeping you healthy, keeping engaged, it actually it offsets some of the other problems of old age, and actually keeps you going a bit longer, she seems to think.
Yeah, they didn't have one of the pictures they showed yesterday, because this came up in conference when we were doing it, was her carrying this huge bag of seeds, and she's pretty fit. She's a super gran.
The carrying power of little old ladies is absolutely immense. They can do.
They must practice somewhere. There must be a special gym.
Maybe. I think the special gym in this case is called work in a seed factory, carrying big heavy bags of seeds everywhere. But well done, Pauline. It's much better than trying to kill and destroy things, because eventually, you get to the point where the NHS is nipple pieces around your ankles and you've spent your life doing something where everyone just ends back in the Middle Ages again, and it's no good at all. So well done, Pauline, and please, perhaps someone like that could run the country, who is thinking about the future and taking us all there happily rather than just taking things apart. Thank you, Jason, for taking us through all that. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. We're going to leave you now, a little bit short this morning, but we've got to leave you now. And we'll see you all again on Monday for another edition of the News Agenda, where hopefully we're getting towards the end of silly season. And there might be some, I don't know what kind of, do you know what week it is next week? We've had Small Boats Week and Health Week. What's next week?
Yeah, what have they been really, really bad at? Find that and chuck it on the
economy, maths.
Yeah,
there you go. It's maths week next week, probably. We'll have to wait and see, won't we? Anyway, we'll see you back on Monday here for another edition of the News Agenda. Till then, everybody, tatty bye.